So it was the summer of 2013. We went to Maine, we being me and my 15-year-old son, Ben. We hadn't been on a vacation in a couple of years, and he had been reminding me of that. And we had been privileged, really, until 2011 when my life blew apart, to travel quite a bit. And so I had reached out to a good friend of mine, Dean Stevens. Some of you know Dean. He's a folk singer in Boston. He's a community activist and kind of really Central American organizer and activist too. And I reached out, do you have a friend who might have a little place kind of modest up in New England we could rent? And he said, David Dodson, who wrote The Farthest Field that we sang, has a little place in Camden, Maine that he rents out. And so it was that Ben and I came to spend a week in Camden, which is one of the most charming coastal villages anywhere in the world, certainly in all of New England. And the first day that we got there, it was a Sunday, and we took a ride on a schooner, kind of a little 2-hour expedition, which was just so fun and so expensive. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to spend my budget for the week by Tuesday morning. So we were walking along the harbor, and we came to the Camden Yacht Club, which is not a place that we would normally be hanging out. But there was a sandwich board in front of the yacht club, and some of you have heard me tell this story, anybody who's known me quite closely. There was a sandwich board in front of the yacht club advertising this sailing program that was going to be offered this week that was just $150. And it was like, come in and register. Well, the yacht club was closed. They must have just accidentally left the sandwich board out there. It started the next morning. We both looked at each other. It was like, this is too good to be true. But we had rushed back to the little house, and I had sent an email, and then I found a phone number and had called. And I think in my typical style, I had probably left a lot of information. You know, my son is a lifeguard, and he loves the water, and our lives have been terrible. I probably went into a lot of detail about why they really needed, at the very last minute, to accept my son and to let him go into the sailing program in about 9 hours. And then about an hour later, I got an email back that said, the short answer is yes. I mean, there were other things, you know, like I'm sure we had to have health forms and all that. But so it was that day that my son was really set on his path. You know, he went to college because of that, where he went, chose a college with the sailing program and has taken his first job the last few years doing that. This morning he's out on the Atlantic leading a regatta with a bunch of kids. But it wasn't just the Camden Yacht Club. It was like everyone in this little coastal village had gotten the memo. Be on the lookout for this mom and her son. They've been through the perfect storm. Try to be really welcoming to them. Because everywhere we went, people were just so gracious. We went back to the place where we had taken the schooner ride, and they saw Ben, and they invited him to be a part of the crew and to, you know, sail around with them. And then the kids that he was in the program with, their parents were like, you should bring him back next summer. He can stay with us the whole time, you know. And then there were the old guys that he met at a place called P.J. Wiley's that just regaled him with stories all afternoon. But it wasn't just Ben and the embrace he had. Me, too. I had been out running one morning, and the neighbor lived a couple of doors down, saw me. You got to come to yoga with me. And I had stopped at the UCC church there in Lincolnville and met the woman pastor. And she was like, come back tomorrow. We have a little group of clergy women. And we had this rich time of sharing and blueberry muffins that were the size of my head, you know. And then we met this woman named Mary Kate. Mary Kate was a good friend of Dean's. She was also a folk singer and kind of part Mother Teresa, part Joan Baez, Che Guevara. And when she found out we were in town, she just had to come visit, and she brought us a blueberry pie. And then when she found out we were going to be going back to Portland, oh, you don't need to take the bus. Let me get you. Just come. You can get a ride with me. And so she had told us, you know, the following Sunday, be at my house at 3:30. We got there at 3:30. She wasn't anywhere to be found. But her husband said, she'll be back. Someone somewhere needed something. I'll eat my hat if you leave before 5. I have a journal, you know, so I had these little funny things he had said. And it was about 5:30 when she got there. And I remember I have never seen a station wagon with that much stuff in it. If you didn't know, you'd think she was living in it. But instead, it was like she was helping other people live from it. You know, the front of the dashboard had like old church bulletins and palm crosses that she had had from the previous Palm Sundays. And she had shoes and blankets and snack bags and all kinds of stuff. And finally, we were on our way, sort of. You know, we stopped at a place or two for her to give people a hug and some blueberries and some more muffins. And then we stopped at a nature preserve so we could see the osprey. And she had jumped out of her car and recited one of the Mary Oliver poems about deep summer. And then we got back in the car and we got lost a little bit, but we ended up having the most delicious pizza I've ever had in my life. And then there was one last stop before we got back to Portland. We had to go see Ruth McKay. She was 87. She still drove her tractor. Her husband had just died a few months before, and all of her friends had gathered around her, and they had sung The Farthest Field. And I remember Mary Kate telling us about Ruth. Oh, she's an incredible person. She's such an activist. The two, Ruth and Mary Kate, had been arrested a few years before at some nuclear protest, and she was telling us about Ruth, who was in her 80s, and she was in the jail cell doing her Tai Chi and just bringing this calm and peace to the whole place. And then a young woman had come into the jail cell. She was all black and blue. She'd been picked up for hitting her boyfriend, who she said had hit her before. And she looked up at Ruth and she said, "Aren't you Ruth McKay? When I was 5, you used to take me and my little sister to Sunday school." And so the whole week was like this. It was like just this whole village of people trying to outdo Abraham and Sarah. Let's just see how welcoming we can be to this struggling young woman, not so young, and her son. And I thought about that when I read this passage. It's so beautiful. Abraham and Sarah. Abraham, he's sitting at the entrance of his tent. The entrance is sacred place. It is absolutely sacred place in all of our lives. It's sacred place in our little humble church. We've got the sandwich boards. We've got the rainbow banner. We've got people at the little tables with the little cloth on there, giving people a name tag, welcoming them. And the rabbi said, why would Abraham be sitting at the entrance to the tent if he was not looking for a stranger, if he was not actively looking for someone he could welcome? And the Hebrew wants to be sure we get that. It tells us Abraham looked up, he saw, he ran, he pleaded, he bowed. It's like he begged these people, can you please come in here so I can care for you? It wasn't that he didn't have anything else going on, because what was he doing at the time? He was talking to God. But he excused himself from his conversation with God to go welcome the strangers. And so the rabbis also said, even more important than chatting it up with God is what? Welcoming the stranger. So he hastened, he ran, he made ready, and after he brought them in and washed their feet, which must have felt really good in the hot heat and dust, after they had been refreshed, Abraham and Sarah set this feast. It says, what, 3 measures of flour? It's so much bread. This is like Ibis Bakery. This is like your salary of bread, right? And plus there's the tender calf. It's like, who does this for a stranger, right? I mean, it's one thing for people who are really dear to you. You know, maybe you'll get out the crystal, and maybe you'll polish the silver, and maybe you'll make a feast. But the stranger, I mean, you think about our country, right? You know, we think about ourselves as we're all welcoming and all that, and Doug mentioned the Iraq War. Think about more recently the Syrian crisis, that huge number of refugees that were created. This is not me just coming up with these figures. Turkey took a little over 3.5 million. Lebanon and Jordan together took 1.5 million. Germany took almost 700,000. The United States took 9,000. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I mean, we know we've kind of lost our way, right? And even in our own lives, I mean, I see it myself. We've got our security systems and our suburban sprawl, and it's almost like COVID. I think kind of we lost some of the muscle of welcoming. I try really hard to look at people, to speak to people, to be engaged with people, to acknowledge people. The other day, the Uber driver stopped to pick me up, and I got in and started to talk to the person, and she turned around and motioned that she was deaf. And I was so relieved because I didn't have to make small talk for the next 30 minutes. I mean, you know, there's the reality is we're tired, right? And so there's some part of it that greeting and welcoming can feel like a chore. And yet in the scripture, greeting the stranger, welcoming the stranger, because you were a stranger, right? You were, over and over and over, you hear that. I mean, it's almost the most common commandment. It's not just something we are called to do. It turns out it's also a gift. This is really the story before the story, right? And do you remember what the next part of the story is? The messengers, the angels, these men are there, and now they've been fed and greeted, and what do? They turn around and say to Abraham and Sarah, who are old and barren and on their last leg, oh, you're going to have a baby. They bring this good news, right? They bring this gift. It's like, it's impossible really to greet and to welcome without being greeted and welcomed. Try to nurture and feed someone without feeling nurtured and fed yourself, right? It's that kind of cyclical thing. Even as we care for other people, we find, oh my gosh, I have been cared for too. I had forgotten that the year before Mary Kate took us on a circuitous route from Camden to Portland, her daughter, Mairead, had stopped and stayed with us. Maybe she was at our house for 8 hours. She was leaving a prestigious college on her way to a prestigious writing workshop. She came in, I don't think she was with us 8 hours, bearing these most beautiful, delicious chocolates I have ever had. And I remember the next summer, Dean had reminded me of this last week when I called him. He said, Mairead's book, which she had been working on then, was just published to wide acclaim. She'd been published in the Paris Review and all of these things. And then I remembered, oh yes, Mary Kate brought us the blueberry pie and wanted to give us this ride and did all of this because she was so thankful, because for 8 hours we had let her daughter basically probably sleep on our couch. But because of that, I ended up on this journey with Mary Kate. She stopped at the Osprey Park. She got out, she recited this prayer, this poem for us. And then when we made it finally to Paris and Tracy's, it was late in the evening. She was leaving us, and I remember she got out and she sang part of a song that she had written that was all about loving people and accepting their limitations and their imperfections, which was, of course, exactly what any parent of a son who was trying to make his own way needed to hear. Thankfully, I've gotten a lot more relaxed as I've aged. You know, there's a lot of different ways to set this up and that up, and a lot of different ways to find. But when it comes to those sandwich boards, if you've been around here and you've tried to bring them in, you've seen how I like leap over the chairs. Those are the last things to come in, right? We want to leave those sandwich boards up there till the very last thing. We want to milk every bit of welcome out of those we can get. Because you never know, do you? Who just might be walking by, just on their last leg, right? I mean, just so broken open, so lost, so need to hear a welcome. Who might be coming down the street and sees that rainbow banner and thinks there's somewhere out there a group of people with an open heart and an open mind, right? Who knows who might be touched just by that simple act? And what of our own lives, really? What are we called to do if not to be our own living, walking sandwich board? Like our own banner of welcome? Like the kind of people who look at people and say, the short answer is yes. So this Lent, may we open our hearts, may we open our eyes, may we open our hands, may we lean in and love. Amen.